Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Film for Fans podcast, the podcast from movie fans for movie fans. I am your host, Ryan Dunlevy, and I am joined with you solo today. Normally, Rob would be on with me, but schedule conflicts precluded Rob being on today. So I'm with you, and we're going to have a great show despite Rob not being here. And as I like to say, sometimes, in fact, because Rob is not here. No, we love Rob. Rob is great, but Rob will be rejoining us next time. Well, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about, of course, our box office update. We'll preview what's coming up this week. For our discussion this week, we're going to talk about visually insane movies, which should be fun. That's a fun category. I like that one. And I'll give you a breakdown of John Wick Chapter 4. So let's get it started. Right from the top, no surprise to anyone, the new entrant to the box office this past week finishes number one, and that is John Wick Chapter 4. John Wick Chapter 4 took home $73.8 million in the box office to top the charts. Shazam Fury of the Gods finished number two at 3.9 million. It is now at 45.9 for its 2-week run so far. Scream 6, 8.3 million. It's up to 89 million total. Creed 3 has been out for a month now and did 8.2 million. That one's at 140 million. And 65 did 3.2 million and has a total of 27.8 million. So let's break this down a little bit. First, before we get into the John Wick's numbers, we'll talk about Shazam Fury of the Gods. I think it has to be said that Shazam Fury of the Gods is definitely a disappointment. We talked a little bit about it last week on the podcast as to the reasons why this movie did not do super well in the box office. The question would be, would it gain any boost in the second week? And the answer is no, it didn't. It dropped 2/3 of its value from the previous week, which was also not very high. So I think DC has to be disappointed with its performance. It's hard to exactly estimate as to what went wrong or what happened because the first Shazam movie was well received and was actually a pretty good movie and enjoyable. But I'm guessing, as I indicated last week, that the kind of mess that is at DC and the kind of upheaval and that they're going in a different direction has just made people not want to care about this movie. I don't know also that it was marketed super well. I don't know that they did a great job presenting a story that you wanted to hear, that you wanted to see from that standpoint. But I don't know. But I think DC has to be disappointed with the performance of Shazam. And it's just another one in the run of really poor movies coming out of DC. Black Adam was not good. And they're just really running up against it. So, but they, at least to their credit, DC has acknowledged that and has attempted to go in a new direction. So we'll see where they land from here. But that's Shazam. Now let's get into John Wick's numbers. John Wick did excellent in its first week. It did $73.8 million, which is a fantastic opening for this movie. Every single one of the John Wick movies continues to escalate in terms of what it's generating at the box office. Just to give you a little background, John Wick, the first movie, which came out in 2014, did 14 million on its opening weekend on an only a $20 million budget. I mean, you watch that movie, it doesn't look like it was only 20 million, but that's what it did. It did 14 million on its opening weekend and rolled to a gross domestic total of $43 million. They came back in 2017 with John Wick 2, Chapter 2, and they doubled the budget. The budget was $40 million for that film, and it opened at $30 million. So what you're seeing in the first two is that it almost matched its budget total in its initial opening weekend, which is a great sign that a movie is profitable and is going to do well. John Wick 2 finished with a domestic gross of $92 million. Came back 2 years later with John Wick Chapter 3, which was by far the most successful of the original three. As you can see, each individual movie subsequently was gaining momentum at the box office. So John Wick Chapter 3, which came out in 2019, did 56 million on its opening weekend. And let me look, I forgot to look up the budget on that one. The budget for this one was 75 million. So they upped the budget quite a bit for John Wick Chapter 3, and it opened at $56 million and rolled to $171 million gross and $328 million worldwide. So it was a wildly successful movie in terms of its numbers. And John Wick Chapter 4 exceeded all of that. Now, keep in mind, all of those three previous movies were pre-pandemic. Now we're kind of out of the pandemic doldrums when it comes to movies, but it still has had an odd lingering effect on the box office. And so we're not entirely sure whether the numbers are completely back to normal or not. And we know that they are for some movies and they're not for others. But the budget for John Wick Chapter 4 was 90 million and it made 73.8 gross domestic in its opening weekend. So these are really, really good numbers. This is going to be the best John Wick movie in terms of box office results. So this is a movie that continues to this is a series that continues to attract box office and continues to attract people to the theater, which is really interesting. And I can understand why. And we'll get a little bit more into the details when I give you my full review of John Wick. But as you can see, every movie gets a little bit bigger budget and produces much bigger results at the box office. So the audience still loves themselves in John Wick. So that's just a little bit of rundown of this past week's. What do we have opening this week? Well, this week we have two movies, and we have Dungeons and Dragons, Honor Among Thieves. And this has been a highly promoted movie coming out, and it has Chris Pine, it has Michelle Rodriguez as two of the main characters. And the plot line here is a charming thief and a band of unlikely adventurers embark on an epic quest to retrieve a lost relic, but things go dangerously awry when they run afoul of the wrong people. Of course, Dungeons and Dragons, the famous game that's been played for a long time, now gets a movie. I've heard good things about the reviews of this movie, and having seen the trailer, I must say I'm not particularly interested. I like Chris Pine. I think he's an excellent actor, and he's going to bring the best out of his performance out into this movie. I have to say, I didn't love it tonally or visually. They're definitely going for a more of a humor action type thing. But I can't say I was overly interested in this one. The second movie that's coming out this week is His Only Son, and this is put on by the people who do the popular biblical series The Chosen. And this is the story of Abraham, and his faith is tested when God calls him to sacrifice his son Isaac. So this is another one from the biblical story, this one from the Old Testament, Genesis, the story of Abraham and Isaac. And it's a story about the journey of faith. So we've seen more and more movies featuring biblical characters coming out into the box office, and all of them have done reasonably well. It is one of those things where you could say in the past that a lot of the quality of the films that were about the biblical characters or that were basically quote unquote Christian movies were of very low quality. We have seen an increase in quality in these movies over the years, and it's been responded to by doing quite well in the box office. We've seen the TV series The Chosen debut a number of their episodes in the box office and have done quite well with it. So I think we're going to see a continued trend with this. They don't make a ton of money in terms of like they're not blockbuster hits or anything like that, but they're successful given their budget and the marketplace they occupy. Um, I am intrigued by His Only Son. I haven't seen one of these in a while, so I would be interested in going to see that one. Um, Probably more so than Dungeons and Dragons at this point, but we'll see. I may check that out. So that is your box office rundown. Of course, you still have John Wick 4, Creed 3, Scream, and Shazam in the box office. So you have a lot of options. If you're going to see a movie this weekend, it's a little rainy where I'm at this weekend. So if you're looking to go to the movies, you have a lot of different options and things that you can choose from. So let's move on to discussion. Uh, I've mentioned on the podcast a couple times that I follow this Twitter feed called Weekly Movie Challenge, and each week the guy who runs the show gives us a different challenge of what to watch that week. This week, that challenge comes to us, and the challenge is to watch a movie that is considered visually insane. And he gives us specifically a list from Emma Tolkien's list. Emma Tolkien put out a letterbox list of visually insane movies, and so we are supposed to pick one from that list and watch it. And this is really interesting. It's always interesting when you get somebody else's list, and this is a big list. There's a lot of movies on this list. Some of the highlights off of this, there's interesting ones. It's all kinds of different movies. Obviously, you get your more like computer generated world, something like Speed Racer, or even like Ghost in the Shell or something like that, where you have like these epic sci-fi or highly computer generated worlds. But you also have things like Romeo and Juliet, or the original Star Wars movies. Uh, Visually insane is an interesting term, uh, and I like it because it leaves something up to be desired, but still kind of holds up a standard to it. Uh, and so I have not decided which one I'm going to watch off this list yet. Uh, but not every one of them is like a highly computer visual effects movie. There's a lot of other movies on there that have different things. Elvis is on there from this past year. So it's a very eclectic list. The Wizard of Oz is on there. Um, and so I thought what I would do is to discuss kind of what a visually insane movie is in my estimation, and then give you some of the things off my personal list of visually insane movies. So when I think of a visually insane movie, I think of a movie first and foremost where the visual elements of the movie are a standout feature. They're a standout feature. You leave that movie, and one of the first things you mention is how the movie looked. Um, that becomes a big deal. Not every movie needs to be quote visually insane or have this incredible look to it, but a visually insane movie will be one where one of your first and lasting impressions of the movie is how it looked. Um, it will also be something that contributes heavily to the feel of the movie. Uh, a visually insane movie will rely on the looks and the visualization to convey a significant amount of the story. Um, you look at your standard rom-coms, the visual are not as important because they're basically backdrops to the relational element of the movie. Now, sometimes they are used better than others, but that's not so much the point. Um, a visually insane movie relies on the visual look and feel of a movie to be able to convey significant parts of the movie. The next thing is I feel like a visually insane movie is one where you become fully immersed in the world. They pull you in and you become visually immersed in the world itself. It kind of sucks you in. You get drawn into the world. You feel like you're walking through this strange, unique world. Um, and you're walking alongside of it. So it has a visceral feel to it. Um, that's another key element to me in what makes a movie visually insane. So let's start out. I'll give you some of the ones on my list. Um, I am still working on my list. I might publish it on the website here because I have a lot of movies on this list. So I'm just going to give you a few on my list. And some of these will be ones that were on this list, and I'll link to Emma Tolkien's list as well, along with the weekly movie challenge if you're interested in that. Um, but I have some ones on there that you'd expect, and maybe some ones that you haven't heard of before. So one of the ones I want to highlight on my list is Ad Astra. I've talked about this movie a number of times on the podcast, uh, but the visualization of this movie is really, really good, and it starts out right from the beginning. In the story, there are these long radio towers that stretch from Earth up into space, and you see Brad Pitt out on this tower overlooking the earth hanging out in space, and the visualization of that, I mean, it just kicks it off right from the beginning of this incredible uh scene. And then you move to what is one of the best moon sequences I've ever seen. As they're driving around out on rovers in the moon, it's really, really good and visually engaging. Not to mention all the flying around in space scenes are really interesting as well. So this is one that really does suck you into the atmosphere and suck you into the environment and provide some visualizations. And I think another element to this is visually insane movies tend to be unique. They have some element of uniqueness to them. So Ad Astra is one of the ones on my list. Skyfall, the third of the Daniel Craig James Bond movies. I think this movie is unbelievably visually insane. This was another one that was, I have several on my list that had the Roger Deakins as a cinematographer. And we've mentioned on the podcast that we are very big fans of Roger Deakins. And this is another one that he did. And Skyfall is an incredible visual movie. Um, every individual scene in this movie is ridiculous. The scenes in China, or was it Hong Kong? I forget. I'm blanking out on where it was. That scene, especially when he's rolling up through the water and the candles are floating in the water and the lighting it's amazing. When he is in Shanghai, that scene where he's swimming in the rooftop pool, uh, unbelievable. And coming down through the hotels, the scenes at Skyfall where you're out on the Scottish countryside and in that castle, and then when the blaze gets set, every single scene is incredible from a visual standpoint. It is a remarkable visual movie. I've been wanting to for a while, doing a breakdown of some of the different scenes on that one. Maybe I'll get to that sooner rather than later. But Skyfall is another one on my list of visually insane movies. Along a different lines is I put The Walk on here. That was the Joseph Gordon-Levitt movie about the guy who strung up a high wire between the towers of the Twin Towers. I put this on my list of visually insane movies because what they were able to create with bringing you to the edge of one of the tallest buildings in the world at that time and putting you on the edge of it. You feel the sense that you're on the edge of a high-rise building, even though you're like sitting in your living room. This was unbelievable movie to see in IMAX. Oh man, it was incredible to see in IMAX. But and then taking you out on top of the wire. What they were able to accomplish with that, I think, pushes this movie into the level of visually insane. Um, it's really, really, really good. I would say Another one on my list would be Star Trek First Contact, the second of the Next Generation movies. And this is the one that featured the Borg. And I think the visualization of the Borg was one of the best representations of the Borg. You felt that sense of intensity. You felt the sense of terror looming around the Borg as you were going through, and the way it was shot and the way it was directed with all the green light. I think the Borg were one of the best adversaries Star Trek ever created, and this movie was a perfect representation of them and everything that they represent and the terror they represent as the hybrid mechanized weapon that the Federation faced. In addition, there's also a fantastic scene where they're walking along the underside of the ship and it's just hanging out there in space, which is really, really cool. I would say all of the John Wick movies are on my list. If you have not seen the John Wick movies, one of the things that makes them special is their visual insanity and the way they use that. And I will get to that a little bit more later. Some other ones on my list: Mad Max Fury Road, Interstellar, Inception, Hero, the Jet Li epic movie. Some of those like Asian cinema releases have just incredible visualizations. Probably most known one of the list is Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which came out in, I think, 99. And there was a series of them that came out. Hero was one of them. Hero has a pretty interesting one. But I also wanted to highlight Tron Legacy. Tron Legacy for me is one of the best movies I've ever seen in creating a visual world that's really interesting and then drawing you into it. If you saw this in IMAX 3D, it was the best movie I ever saw in IMAX 3D. But the visual insanity in this world is incredible. They're creating a digital world that didn't exist, but the lights and the shadows and the way they played with that digital world, it felt foreign and yet it felt similar. It was a fantastically directed movie, fantastic visual movie. So I had to mention Tron Legacy. Of course, you've got Sin City, 300, Dune, The Fountain, which I've talked about regular, Interstellar, Inception, Ghost in a Shell, 1917. Lots and lots of movies on this list. So I'd love to hear about some of your favorite visually insane movies. So you can leave us a comment or send us a message at filmforfans.com. I'd love to hear from you. All right, so we'll close out this week's episode. I'm going to talk to you about John Wick Chapter 4. I did have a chance to go see it this week. And I must say I loved it. I really, really did. John Wick movies are not known for their storyline. So if you were looking for an intensely deep storyline, you were not going to get it with John Wick. What you get is raw emotion and incredible setting, scenery, visualization, and fight coordination. And as has been the case with the previous ones, this movie succeeded wildly. What I love about the John Wick movies, and this is before we get into any spoilers. So this is general thoughts that won't give you any specific spoilers. I will let you know when I start giving exact specific spoilers. What this movie does incredibly well, and what a lot of them have done incredibly well, is create an unbelievable visually enticing scene and then put you into the middle of this visually enticing scene and create a remarkable action sequence based on it, using the elements of this incredible visual scene as an intricate part of the action scene that follows. There have been a lot of movies and a lot of action movies that put you in really crazy visual scenes and have used it to one degree or another. But I think John Wick does better than almost any other action movie is give you a high sense of art to it. It's not just random violence for random violence. It is a combination of setting, scenery, lighting, coordination, choreography, all working seamlessly together to create an unbelievably enticing and visually fantastic storyline, uh, story sequence. It's not really a storyline, but um, this one had some remarkable action sequences in it, and I was caught myself remarking upon them as they were happening and analyzing what they had going on. And there were just some really unique scenes. It has always had this kind of high elevated aesthetic to it. Is one of the things I like about it. There's a sophistication to it that you don't necessarily always see on other random shoot 'em up action movies. There's a level of sophistication and high world culture to them, which is unique, and this one continues along that variety. Um, and so it is once again a visually fascinating movie. Uh, they are some of the best action movies I have ever seen from that standpoint, and they are a sight to behold, and this one is no exception. So I very much enjoyed it. Uh, what I think is interesting, which I will say now is your spoiler warning. I will get into the spoilers of John Wick Chapter 4 now. So if you have not seen the movie and are planning on see it, this is your warning. You can skip to the end of the podcast at this point. Uh, so now that you've had your spoiler warning, I will get into a few specific things. One of the scenes I absolutely loved. It required a little bit of suspension of disbelief, but the what you gain out of it is a perfect example of what John Wick does well. And it's the scene near the end of the movie as he's racing towards trying to get to the church on time for his final duel. He's faced with a stairwell in Paris that's like 256. It's like a stone outdoor stairwell. It's 256 steps with multiple levels. And there's like a 10-minute fight sequence on this stairwell. And it is incredible use of a visually appealing setting, but then using that specific setting as an intricate element to the choreographed fight sequences. So he's having to slog his way uphill through enemies while at the same time getting thrown back down, having to fight his way back up and getting thrown back down. And it's a remarkable use of a specific setting. And now there's a little bit of suspension of disbelief because all the guys, like, basically they get away with people not killing him by shooting him with his Kevlar outfit thing. So that does play a little bit of a role because there's no cover for him to hide in this particular scene. So it does require a little bit of suspension of disbelief, but it is fascinating and an engaging story. Visually as you look at it. Another scene that stuck out to me was John Wick. There's always a good club fight scene. There's always a good club battle scene, and the club settings that they create in this movies are visual marvels. You have constantly throughout the John Wick movies. One of the key aspects they use really really well is lighting, and in this particular club scene, there's use of and throughout the movies, there's generally a blue or a dark green standard color palette. A lot of this stuff takes place at night. So you have a dark with a blue or green color palette, and then they shine bright colors throughout. Sometimes it's reds and oranges and purples, or like a bright white light. So you get that stark contrast from the dark to the fluorescent, and it just creates an amazing visual effect. So the club scene here is really fantastic. At one point, there's waterfalls in this particular club, and you see John pounding on this guy, and he's half in the waterfall and half out, and it just creates a fantastic visual effect there. So the level of detail they place in those is really cool. Um, at the it'll be interesting because they're already developing a John Wick 5. So I don't know exactly what they're going to do with that, considering at the end John Wick dies. And so they're probably going to do some sort of like he's not really dead type thing or something along those lines. But it was interesting how they chose to end it, and I liked the ending of it. I liked the way they did the final duel scene. It was well done, and I look forward to more movies along this lines. So I would highly advise you, if you like action movies, the John Wick movies are excellent, and I would recommend them. Very violent. They are very violent. There's lots of guys getting shot and lots of um, things of that nature. It's a true revenge story, as it were, but really fantastic in terms of visual effect. Uh, so that's John Wick 4. And make sure you get out and see it. And that is all for our podcast today. Thank you for checking out filmforfans.com and listening to the podcast, sharing your friends, or watching it on YouTube. Until next time, enjoy the movies.